What happens when the wilderness doesn't just test your survival skills, but everything you believe about loyalty, trust, and the price of sacrifice? One man's journey takes him into the heart of the unknown, where the boundary between friend and foe blurs, and the unexpected is the only certainty. A twist changes everything, revealing a truth that shatters the very foundation of his world. Ready to uncover the hidden depths of this story? Like, subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from and which part of this journey left you speechless. Colt Avery's first sensation was pain, not sharp, but deep settled in his shoulders, like the ache of a heavy life. When his eyes opened, the world was tilted sideways, the pine trees slicing through pale morning light. His back pressed hard against rough bark, and he couldn't move his arms. A rope thick and biting had been wound around his chest and wrists, pinning him to the trunk like prey left for scavengers. His mouth was dry, his lips cracked, and blood had dried on his temple. He didn't remember much, only the shouts of men, a sudden blow to the head, then darkness. His name was Colt Avery, a black park ranger from the Northern District, a man who'd spent years protecting this forest from poachers' fires and fools. Yet now he was the one left bound in its silence. The irony didn't escape him. Somewhere above, a crow cried, once then vanished into the distance. Colt pulled at the ropes, testing their give. They held firm, wet from dew slick against his skin. Pain flared as the fibers cut deeper into the wounds already forming on his wrists. He gritted his teeth. Whoever tied him here knew what they were doing. Professional, deliberate, cruel. He took a slow breath and let his senses stretch. The forest was alive in a restrained way, like it was watching. Cicadas hummed faintly. Wind pressed through pine needles. Somewhere off to the east, a brook murmured. Then came another sound, faint, distant, soft enough he thought he imagined it. A bark. Colt froze. The sound came again, clearer now, bouncing through the trees, sharp but familiar. His pulse spiked. He knew that bark. It came from months ago, on a foggy morning near Redfern Ridge, when he'd found a stray caught in a steel trap. The dog had been fierce, then all teeth and fear, but he'd freed it, cleaned its leg, given it food, and walked away. He hadn't expected to ever see it again. Yet now that same bark echoed through the forest like a ghost answering his memory. No, he whispered half to himself. Can't be. Branches rustled to his right. A shadow slipped between trunks, low, gray, cautious. His breath caught as a pair of amber eyes appeared through the fog. Then the shape emerged fully. A large dog fur, mottled gray, and black ribs faintly visible, shoulders broad and scarred. A fresh scratch ran along its flank. But what caught Colt's breath was the jagged line on its right shoulder, an old wound healed crooked exactly where he'd once applied antiseptic and wrapped it with his own bandana. "You've got to be kidding me," Colt murmured, voice hoarse. The dog stopped about 15 feet away, nose-twitching tail hanging still. It didn't bark this time. It just stared as if trying to decide whether the man tied to the tree was friend or threat. Colt lowered his head slightly, softening his gaze. "Easy, boy," he said quietly. "It's me, Colt." The dog tilted its head. The light broke through a branch and glinted in its eyes, revealing a flicker of recognition. It took one cautious step forward, then another. Its paws were silent against the moss, every movement calculated. Colt didn't move a muscle. He'd learned long ago that animals understood calm more than words. The dog reached the rope, sniffed it, then backed up, watching him again. Its breathing was quick alert. "You smell the fear, huh?" Colt muttered dryly. "Don't blame you." The dog huffed softly, almost like a scoff, then circled the tree. Colt craned his neck to follow it, but couldn't see much past the trunk. He only heard the quiet sound of sniffing claws scraping the dirt, and then a low grunt. "Yeah," he whispered, "that's the problem. Rope's too thick." The dog appeared again, standing in front of him, ears raised. It made a short, sharp noise, not quite a bark, not quite a growl, a question. Colt almost smiled. "Guess you're asking what happened," he said. "Poachers. Got me while I was scouting their camp. Thought they'd leave me here for the coyotes." The dog's eyes flicked toward the dark stretch of forest behind Colt, as if it understood the word coyote. It moved forward again, sniffed his boots, then his knees, then the rope across his chest. Its breath was warm against his skin. Colt flinched but stayed still. The dog's jaw opened slightly, teeth grazing the fibers. "No way," Colt said under his breath. "You're not..." The dog bit down, gently testing. The rope creaked but didn't break. The dog backed off, shook its head, and tried again, harder this time. Fibers strained. Colt felt the pressure shift around his chest and held his breath. For a moment he thought it might actually work. Then the rope held unmoved. The dog stopped panting lightly. Colt sighed. "It's no use, boy. You'll wear your teeth out before that gives." The dog stepped back, studying him again with that same analytical stare. It wasn't frustration, it was thought. Then it lifted its head sharply, ears perked toward the northern ridge. Colt froze. He didn't hear it at first, but then it came low, drawn out, rising through the trees. A howl, not a dog's, a wolf's. The dog's hackles rose immediately, a rumble building in its throat. Colt's pulse raced. "Don't tell me." Another howl answered from farther away, and then a third. A pack. They were close, too close. The dog turned its body, stepping in front of Colt, head-low teeth bared toward the shadows. "You don't have to do that," Colt whispered, fear cutting through his exhaustion. "Go, save yourself." The dog didn't move. Its tail was stiff, its stance rooted. The rope was still tight, Colt still helpless, but somehow the air shifted. He wasn't alone anymore. The howls echoed again, louder now, closing in, but the dog's growl matched them, low, defiant, ready. Colt shut his eyes briefly. "You remember me," he whispered, voice cracking. "After all this time." The dog didn't answer, but its silence was louder than words. The forest had gone still, like every sound was holding its breath. Colt Avery's pulse thundered in his ears as he watched the gray dog stand guard in front of him, its body trembling with a mix of alertness and memory. The morning fog had thinned, revealing the long stretch of pine trunks around them. Shafts of cold sunlight breaking through like faint prison bars. The dog didn't move for several seconds, its ears flicking toward every snap of a twig, every distant howl. Colt wanted to believe that the bond they shared months ago hadn't faded, that some part of that wild animal remembered the man who had once pulled its paw from a steel trap and whispered gentle words until the pain faded. He cleared his throat, voice low and dry. "Hey," he said, "it's me." Remember, the dog's head turned slightly at the sound, eyes narrowing in thought. Colt spoke again, softer now. "Easy, boy. You're safe." For a moment, nothing happened. Then the dog stepped closer, one careful paw at a time until its nose brushed the rope near his ribs. The scent must have told it everything it needed to know, human familiar and suffering. It gave a short exhale that sounded like a sigh and began to sniff along the knots. Colt stayed perfectly still, afraid to break whatever fragile understanding hung between them. He could feel its breath warm against the back of his arm. "That's it," he whispered. "You're doing good." The dog pressed its teeth against one of the strands and began to pull, not wildly, but with deliberate precision. Each tug made the rope fibers groan. Colt winced as the tension rubbed against his skin, but he didn't dare stop it. He could see the muscles along the animal's neck flex its jaw, working carefully as if it understood exactly what it was doing. A flash of pride flickered through him, mixed with disbelief. This creature, once wild and wounded, was now his only chance at survival. The rope began to fray slightly where its teeth worked. Colt tried shifting his shoulders to help, but the movement only sent a stab of pain through his chest. "Come on, boy," he muttered under his breath. "You got this." The dog paused briefly, ears flicking back as though it had heard and understood the encouragement. It resumed its work, biting, pulling, pausing, breathing. Time stretched thin, each second drawn out by the sound of rope fibers straining, and the faint growl of determination in the dog's throat. Then suddenly, the forest's rhythm broke. A new sound cut through the unmistakable crunch of paws on dry leaves. The dog froze mid-bite. Its ears went rigid. Colt held his breath. The howls he had heard earlier were closer now, maybe less than 200 yards away. The dog's head snapped toward the ridge, eyes gleaming. Colt could almost feel the decision forming in the animal's mind. "No," he whispered sharply. "Stay. Keep going." But instinct was already taking over. The dog moved a step away, its chest-heaving nose testing the air. Another howl, deeper, more commanding, echoed through the trees, followed by rustling movement. The pack was circling. Colt looked around frantically, scanning the forest, searching for any sign of escape, any chance to loosen the rope himself, but his wrists were too raw, too tight. He felt the dread rising like a cold tide in his chest. "You have to go," he whispered to the dog, but his words were hollow because he didn't mean them. The animal turned back toward him, eyes fierce. It barked once sharp and low, as if telling him to be quiet, then crouched, tail stiff, head down, growl rumbling like distant thunder. Colt swallowed hard. "You stubborn thing," he murmured. "You're just like me." The first wolf appeared seconds later, a dark shape slipping between the trees, its outline ghostly in the mist. Then another, then two more. Their eyes reflected the faint sunlight, cold and predatory. The lead wolf was large, black-furred, its muzzle scarred from countless fights. It didn't rush in. It watched, calculating, pacing a slow semicircle around them. The gray dog stepped sideways, blocking Colt completely. Hackle's raised teeth bared. The wolves fanned out, silent and patient, reading the situation. Colt could feel his heartbeat hammering so hard it hurt. He knew how packs worked. They tested, feinted, waited for weakness. And right now, he was the weakest link. "Don't fight them," Colt whispered urgently. "They'll tear you apart." The dog didn't listen. It let out a guttural snarl that echoed off the trees, a sound that didn't belong to a domestic creature, but to something born in the wild. The lead wolf froze, taken aback, its ears twitching. Colt used that pause, twisting his wrists again, pushing against the bark behind him, feeling the rope dig deeper, but also shift ever so slightly. His skin tore. Blood ran warm down his forearm. He ignored it. The dog lunged forward with sudden violence, snapping its jaws in warning. The wolves responded instantly, 3 of them spreading out, teeth flashing. Colt shouted no, but his voice was drowned in the chaos of snarls and the crack of branches breaking under their weight. The gray dog met the first attacker head-on, slamming its shoulder into the smaller wolf and throwing it sideways into the dirt. The impact startled the pack. The leader growled and charged, claws raking the ground. Colt strained against the rope, helpless fury flooding through him. He could hear the sickening thud of bodies colliding, the desperate rhythm of growls and yelps. He twisted harder, pain flaring white behind his eyes, and felt the rope's edge begin to loosen just slightly. The dog stumbled back, limping a streak of blood along its side. It looked over its shoulder briefly, and in that fleeting glance, Colt saw something that hit him like a punch, the same defiant resolve he'd seen in his own reflection too many times. It didn't matter that it was outnumbered. It wouldn't back down. The lead wolf lunged again, snapping at its neck, but the dog spun and bit deep into its foreleg, drawing a howl that shattered the air. The pack hesitated, suddenly uncertain. The dog took that moment to bark once at Colt, the same low sound as before, half command, half reassurance, then turned back to face the others. Colt, chest heaving, gritted his teeth and pulled with every ounce of strength he had left. The rope strained, one knot twisting under the pressure. He pushed against the bark again, feeling splinters cut into his back. The dog's growls grew louder, its movements slower but unbroken. The wolves finally began to back away, their confidence shaken, the leader limping. One by one, they retreated into the fog, their eyes fading into the trees. The silence that followed was deafening. The dog stood panting, chest-heaving, fur bristled, one ear torn. It turned slowly back toward Colt, limped forward and pressed its head briefly against his leg, as if to say it wasn't over yet. Colt looked down at the brave creature and whispered, "You bought me time." The smell of blood hung heavy in the morning air. Colt Avery's heartbeat refused to slow down, pounding against his chest as if trying to break free itself. The forest had gone quiet again, but it wasn't the peace of safety. It was the kind of silence that warned of something worse. The gray dog stood motionless beside him, its fur damp with blood, its breath fogging in the cold air. The rope still held Colt fast to the tree, his arms numb, his muscles trembling from strain. He looked down at the dog, watching the animal's ribs rise and fall in ragged rhythm, its eyes still locked on the tree line where the wolves had vanished. "You did it," Colt whispered, his voice rough and quiet. "You scared them off." But the dog didn't relax. Its ears stayed high, its nostrils flaring as it sniffed the wind. Colt followed its gaze and saw what it already knew: movement between the shadows. The wolves hadn't fled far. They were regrouping, circling wider this time, learning from their mistake. Colt cursed under his breath. The gray dog growled low, deep enough to vibrate through the air, a warning meant for any creature daring to step closer. The sound wasn't just animal instinct. It carried defiance, courage, and a strange kind of intelligence, as if the dog knew exactly what was coming and refused to back down. Colt tested the rope again, pulling against it with every ounce of strength left in him, but the fibers dug cruelly into his wrists. Blood slicked his skin, and pain blurred the edges of his vision. He closed his eyes, forcing his breath steady. "Think, Colt. Think," he muttered. His knife was gone, his radio missing, and the rope was too thick to break by brute force. But the dog had weakened a section earlier when it chewed the outer layers. If he could get it to bite that same spot again— no, if he could find a way to direct it there while keeping it safe from another attack, he might stand a chance. The dog shifted its weight, suddenly turning its body sideways, blocking his view. A second later, Colt heard the crunch of leaves and the snap of a branch. Then he saw them. 6 wolves this time, forming a half circle around them, their eyes glowing faintly amber in the filtered light. The leader limped but stood tall, its lips curled back in a snarl that bared teeth as white as bone. Colt's throat went dry. He could feel fear crawling up his spine, cold and sharp. "Don't do it," he whispered to the dog. "We won't survive another fight." But the dog didn't listen. It stepped forward, fur-raised tail rigid. The growl it released this time was louder, a warning that cut through the forest air like a blade. The wolves slowed their heads, lowering in cautious unison. Colt could see them calculating, sensing the weakness of a wounded opponent, yet wary of its unrelenting will. The lead wolf advanced a few feet, its paws silent on the pine needles. The dog matched each step muscle strength for strength until they stood only yards apart. Then, without warning, a sudden gust of wind blew through the trees, scattering leaves across the clearing and carrying the scent of Colt's blood. The wolves reacted instantly, their hesitation evaporating. They lunged. The gray dog met the first with a savage snarl, knocking it aside, but 2 more came from the flanks. Colt shouted behind you, though the words were useless against chaos. The sound of snapping jaws filled the clearing. The dog spun teeth, flashing, biting into one wolf's shoulder before twisting away from another's attack. Colt pulled at the rope again, every muscle screaming for release. His wrists slipped slightly in the friction, and for the first time, he felt the knot shift. Hope surged through him. "Come on," he hissed through clenched teeth, "just a little more." The rope creaked, but it wasn't enough. He looked at the dog again, his chest tight with helpless anger. It was fighting 3 wolves now, teeth bared, fur flying in tufts. One wolf managed to clamp onto its hind leg, dragging it down. Colt shouted again, but his voice broke. The dog yelped a sound that hit him harder than any physical pain. Without thinking, Colt twisted his wrists backward, scraping his skin raw against the bark, forcing the rope to rub against a rough edge. Each movement felt like fire, but it was working. Threads began to snap, tiny cracks in the prison that held him. The dog, bleeding but unyielding, slammed its body into the wolf that held it, breaking free, long enough to stand between Colt and the rest. Its eyes flicked to him for a second, and in that glance, Colt saw it again, that uncanny awareness, the same look from before when it had tried to free him. It knew what he was doing. It understood. The dog backed up 2 steps toward him, its teeth snapping at a wolf trying to circle behind. Colt gritted his teeth and shouted, "Here, boy, the rope!" He twisted his shoulder as far as the rope would allow, exposing the spot where the fibers had already started to fray. The dog glanced once at the wolves, then at Colt, and made a decision that defied every instinct of self-preservation. It turned and leapt behind the tree teeth, finding the weakened section, like it remembered exactly where it was. Colt felt the pressure change instantly, the rope tightening once, then loosening slightly. "That's it," he gasped. "Bite through it." The wolves lunged again. The dog didn't stop chewing, even as one wolf's jaws snapped inches from its side. Colt pulled against the rope at the same time, using every ounce of his strength to widen the gap. Another strand snapped, then another. The dog growled the sound, half pain, half determination. A wolf finally lunged too close and clamped onto its shoulder. The gray dog twisted violently, teeth tearing at the rope while kicking backward. The world blurred into motion. The crack of rope fibers breaking Colt's breath caught in his throat, and the screech of the lead wolf closing in. Then came the sound Colt had been praying for, a sharp, dry snap. His right arm fell free. Without hesitation, he grabbed the rope with his newly released hand and yanked hard, ripping it from the bark. Pain shot through his wrists, but freedom rushed in faster than agony. The wolves paused, startled by his movement. The dog barked once sharp and commanding, as if signaling him. Colt didn't waste a second. He tore the remaining rope from his left arm, stumbled forward, and reached for a thick branch on the ground. His fingers closed around it just as the lead wolf lunged. He swung. The impact echoed through the clearing wood, meeting bone with a crack that sent the predator sprawling backward. Colt stood beside the dog, now chest-heaving sweat stinging his eyes. "We're not dying here," he rasped. The wolves regrouped, snarling, but they didn't rush again. The sight of a man free and standing beside a bleeding dog seemed to break the rhythm of their confidence. One by one, they backed away, their growls fading into the mist. When the last one disappeared into the trees, the clearing fell quiet, except for the sound of Colt's breathing and the dog's faint whimper. Colt dropped the stick, kneeling beside the animal. The forest stretched endlessly before them, a labyrinth of pine and shadow, and every sound carried warning. Colt Avery's arms burned from where the rope had cut into them, his muscles trembling as he leaned against a tree to catch his breath. The gray dog, still bleeding from its shoulder, stood close at his side, panting heavily, eyes darting toward every shifting patch of fog. They had driven the wolves off, but both of them knew it was temporary. Predators didn't forgive weakness, and blood had already marked their trail. Colt looked down at the animal, its chest rising and falling with each harsh breath, and whispered, "We move west. There's a ranger cabin a mile out. You hear me, boy? Just 1 mile." The dog gave a faint whine in acknowledgement, though its legs trembled with exhaustion. Colt tore a strip from his sleeve and tied it around the dog's wound, rough, but enough to slow the bleeding. His fingers shook as he tightened the knot. "We're getting out of this," he said, though his voice was less certain than he wanted. He grabbed a thick branch to use as a walking stick and began moving. The air was heavy with the scent of sap and iron, the quiet filled with the occasional rustle of leaves that set his nerves on edge. Every so often he caught the faint reflection of eyes in the underbrush, curious, waiting. They weren't safe yet. As they moved through the forest, Colt's mind replayed everything: the ambush, the rope, the fight, the strange understanding that had formed between man and beast. He'd spent years protecting this land, enforcing rules to keep it balanced, yet here he was relying on the wild itself to survive. The irony wasn't lost on him. He looked back at the dog again, its head low, but determined, its tail stiff with vigilance. "You should have run," Colt muttered. "Could have been long gone by now." The dog's ear flicked as if to disagree. Colt smiled faintly despite the pain. "Yeah," he whispered. "Guess neither of us are built to run." They continued weaving between fallen logs and patches of fern until they reached a clearing where sunlight spilled through the canopy. For the first time since dawn, Colt felt a flicker of relief. He stopped near a stump and crouched down, rubbing his wrists where the rope had dug deep. The dog sniffed the air, then suddenly froze. Every muscle in its body went rigid, tail-straight ears locked forward. Colt followed its gaze, heart sinking as he saw what had triggered the reaction shadows moving fast between the trees. Not the same wolves. Bigger, leaner, hungrier. The second pack. "Damn it," Colt hissed, pushing himself up. "They tracked us." The gray dog growled, stepping in front of him again, though Colt could see its legs quivering. He looked around quickly. The clearing was too open. They needed cover, something to even the odds. His eyes caught sight of a half-rotted log lying nearby, its interior dark and hollow. He moved fast, snapping off a piece of bark and striking it against a flint he carried in his pocket. Sparks flew weakly, but nothing caught. He tried again, his hands trembling from fatigue. "Come on," he muttered. "Come on." The third strike landed true, igniting a small flame that licked along the edge of the bark. Colt lifted it, waving the fire low to the ground, using the smoke to mask their scent. The dog barked once in alarm at the flame, but didn't back away. It seemed to understand the purpose. "Fire keeps them off," Colt said quickly, "but it'll draw others too." The first wolf broke through the tree line, its coat dark gray, its teeth gleaming. It hesitated at the smoke, but didn't stop. Colt gripped the burning branch tighter, the heat biting his palm. Back he warned, swinging it in an arc. The wolf snarled and retreated a step, but another came from the opposite side, then another. Within seconds, they were surrounded again. The gray dog lunged without waiting for command, slamming into the closest attacker and sending it rolling. Colt swung the fire toward the next, striking it across the muzzle. The wolf howled, the smell of singed fur cutting through the air. The rest circled warily, confusion flickering in their eyes as firelight danced around them. Colt felt adrenaline flood his veins, pushing back the exhaustion. He moved beside the dog, covering its flank as it fought the two of them, acting like partners who'd trained together all their lives. "Stay low," Colt muttered, not knowing why he spoke but needing to. The dog snarled, driving another wolf back into the smoke. For a few seconds, the tactic worked. The wolves hesitated, unwilling to charge through flame. But then a deep growl rolled through the clearing, low and commanding. A massive alpha stepped out from behind the brush, its fur black as coal, its body twice the size of the others. It looked at Colt, then at the fire, then at the dog, and it didn't flinch. "Oh hell," Colt whispered. The alpha lunged. Colt swung his torch, but the creature hit it mid-air, knocking the branch out of his hands and scattering embers across the ground. Fire met dry leaves. The flames spread faster than Colt expected, racing in thin orange tongues across the clearing. Heat roared up, instantly filling the air with choking smoke. The wolves faltered, confused by the chaos, but the alpha pushed through, focused entirely on Colt and the gray dog. Colt dove sideways, grabbing another stick from the ground. The dog darted forward, intercepting the alpha mid-leap, teeth clamping down on its neck. The two rolled violently, snarls and yelps echoing above the crackling fire. Colt stumbled to his feet, smoke burning his eyes, and swung his branch at a wolf charging from behind, connecting with a dull thud. "Move," he shouted to the dog. "Get clear." But the dog was locked in the fight jaws buried in the alpha's throat, refusing to let go even as claws raked its side. The fire crept closer, snapping at the edge of Colt's boots. He grabbed a handful of dirt and flung it on the flames, but it was spreading too fast. Smoke thickened, swallowing the clearing. The wolves began to retreat, yelping and darting away from the heat, but the alpha remained thrashing under the dog's weight. Then, with one desperate twist, the gray dog managed to drag it directly into the burning log. The smell of singed fur and ash filled the air as the alpha shrieked and bolted into the trees, leaving a trail of smoke behind. Colt rushed forward, coughing, grabbing the dog by its collar and pulling it away from the fire. Its fur was scorched and it was limping badly, but it was alive. "You crazy damn hero," he rasped, dragging them both toward the safety of the trees. The flames roared behind them, devouring the clearing in orange light. Colt collapsed against a fallen trunk chest, heaving the dog, pressing close beside him. They watched the blaze consume the place where they'd fought, the smoke spiraling high into the cold blue sky. "We're not safe," Colt whispered after a long silence. "That fire's gonna bring everything down on us Rangers animals, maybe even those bastards who tied me up." The dog let out a tired huff, lowering its head onto his boot. Colt stared into the fire a while longer, the reflection flickering in his dark eyes. "But you saved me again," he murmured. "You saved both of us." The wind shifted, carrying the sound of distant engines, poachers, maybe returning to check their work. Colt's stomach turned cold. He looked down at the gray dog, still half conscious, but breathing steady. The world smelled like smoke and iron. Colt Avery crouched behind a charred log, his lungs burning from the smoke still drifting through the trees, the taste of ash thick on his tongue. The fire they had unleashed had carved a scar through the clearing, a wide black wound across the forest floor. The gray dog lay beside him, chest-heaving fur singed and matted with soot. Its eyes fluttered half shut. But when Colt shifted, it opened them, immediately alert, despite exhaustion. "We can't stay long," Colt whispered, though his voice was little more than a rasp. His throat felt raw, scraped by heat and fear. The wind had shifted again, pushing the smoke east, and he knew that meant trouble. Poachers, the same ones who tied him to that tree, would see the plume and come to investigate. The thought made his stomach twist. He looked down at his wrist and froze. The rope. A section of it still clung to his right arm, the end fused into a hardened knot. His skin had swollen beneath it, turning dark and slick. He cursed under his breath. He had freed himself in the fight, but the last coil had gone unnoticed, a cruel reminder of what they'd done to him. He tugged at it, but the pain made his vision blur. "Damn it," he hissed, teeth gritted. The dog's ears flicked at the sound. It lifted its head and sniffed his arm, nose brushing the burned fibers. "No, boy," Colt said softly, not this time. He reached for the blade of his old utility knife, blunt, nearly useless, but it was gone, lost in the chaos. He looked at the rope again, feeling it bite deeper as his arm swelled. His pulse throbbed through it like a heartbeat outside his body. Panic clawed at his chest. He needed to cut it off soon or it would strangle the circulation entirely. The dog rose shakily, sensing the urgency. Colt met its gaze and saw the understanding there. "You don't have to do anything," he whispered, but the dog stepped closer, anyway, sniffing the rope again. Ears flattened, eyes sharp with focus. "I said no." Colt repeated, though he knew words meant little to instincts older than language. The dog began to gnaw gently at the knot, its teeth scraping against Colt's skin. The sensation sent a shock of pain through his arm, but he didn't pull away. "Easy," he muttered. "Just easy." The sound of teeth grinding against rope filled the quiet. Smoke drifted low, wrapping them in a thin gray veil. The dog paused to catch its breath, its sides trembling from effort. Colt stared out over the smoldering clearing, the blackened stumps jutting up like bones. The fire had devoured everything, yet in its destruction, it had bought them time. He'd never used fire as a weapon before, but desperate men didn't have the luxury of hesitation. He wondered if that made him no better than the ones who had trapped him. "You did good," he said, quietly reaching his free hand to touch the dog's head. "We're still here." The dog resumed its work, jaws working slow but determined. Each tug loosened the knot, and with each one, Colt felt the blood begin to flow again, painfully like thawing ice. Then a new sound rose above the forest's groaning silence, the distant rumble of engines. Colt froze. The dog stopped chewing and lifted its head, ears pointed toward the horizon. The noise grew louder, closer. Trucks, maybe 2, maybe 3. "They're back," Colt whispered. His heart kicked hard. The dog growled low, almost inaudible, the same sound it had made before every fight. Colt's mind raced. They were less than half a mile from where the ambush had happened. If those poachers found him alive, it wouldn't end the same way as last time. He scanned the clearing again, his eyes catching movement near the burned edge. 3 men stepping through the smoke rifles slung over their shoulders, faces wrapped in cloth. He ducked lower, pulling the dog with him. The men moved slowly, sweeping the area, their voices muffled but clear enough for Colt to make out bits and pieces. "That blaze came from right here. Must have been him," another voice answered, rough and certain. "He couldn't have gone far. Check the ridge." Colt clenched his jaw. He could see the faint reflection of metal in the sunlight as one of them adjusted his weapon. The dog pressed against his leg, silent, now muscles coiled tight. Colt looked at its face, the scars across its muzzle, the dried blood around its neck, and felt guilt twist inside him. "You shouldn't have to keep doing this," he whispered. "You already saved me twice." The dog's eyes flicked up to his unwavering. It didn't need to understand words. It understood intent. It lowered its body to the ground, blending with the ash, every movement quiet, controlled. Colt followed its lead, lowering himself flat against the dirt. The men came closer, their boots crunching over burned twigs. One of them paused less than 30 feet away, scanning the ground. "Tracks," he said. "Fresh." Colt's breath caught. The man crouched, touching the earth, then raised his head slowly, eyes narrowing. "Dog prints. Big one." The man beside him laughed dryly. "That mutt's still around doesn't matter," the leader said. "If he's alive, he'll be nearby." He lifted his rifle. The sound of the safety clicking off sliced through the air like thunder. The dog shifted a low growl, rumbling deep in its chest. Colt pressed a hand against its back. "Not yet," he mouthed silently. "Wait." The wind picked up again, stirring the ash. The smell of burning pine masked their scent for a heartbeat longer. Then the rope on Colt's wrist slipped again, frayed by the dog's earlier chewing. He took a slow breath, gripped the loose end with his left hand, and yanked hard. The last knot broke free, tearing skin in the process. Blood poured down his arm, but the pain didn't matter. He was free again, fully this time. The relief hit like lightning, followed by the sharp edge of fear. The poachers moved closer. The leader stopped beside the log. Colt hid behind his boots, inches from Colt's face. Colt could see the reflection of his own skin in the metal of the man's rifle barrel. He didn't move. The dog didn't breathe. The world seemed to hang in a single endless second. Then from somewhere deeper in the woods, a sudden echo broke the stillness, the faint crack of a tree branch falling. The men turned instantly toward the sound. There the leader barked. All 3 ran toward it, rifles raised. Colt didn't hesitate. He grabbed the dog's collar and pulled it up. Now he whispered. They moved in silence, circling around the burned clearing, staying low through the smoke. Every step was a gamble. When they reached the tree line, Colt turned back once, watching the men disappear into the haze. He could barely see their outlines through the shifting gray. His pulse hammered so loud, it drowned out everything else. The dog pressed against his leg, again urging him forward. He exhaled shakily and followed its lead. They slipped into the underbrush, vanishing into the forest's deeper shade. When they finally stopped miles from the clearing, the dog collapsed beside a stream, too exhausted to stand. Colt knelt, washing his arm in the cold water, watching the blood swirl away. He looked at the rope remnants still clinging to his skin and threw them into the current. "No more," he muttered. The forest thickened as the sun began to drop behind the western ridge, staining the smoke-streaked sky a dull orange. Colt Avery's boots sank into the mud with every step, each breath a struggle against exhaustion and fear. The dog limped beside him, its fur still blackened from ash, its body trembling with effort, but unwilling to stop. Behind them, faint but persistent, came the sound of engines and voices fading, and returning as if the forest itself were breathing with the hunt. Colt knew they were being tracked. The smoke from the fire had left a trail even a fool could follow. The poachers were methodical, armed and angry. They wanted to finish what they started, and now, after everything, Colt had no weapon and no backup, just the wounded creature that refused to abandon him. They followed the narrow slope downhill until the trees opened to a wide river, the current swollen from early spring melt. Colt stopped short, chest heaving. The water was too deep to cross safely, especially with his arm half numb and the dog injured. But the sound of the trucks echoing off the rocks left no choice. "We're running out of ground," he muttered, scanning the banks. The current roared white foam colliding against boulders midstream. The smell of wet moss filled the air. Colt's eyes caught something an old ranger crossing further downstream, half collapsed, built of weathered logs and rope cables. It wasn't safe, but it was their only option. He crouched beside the dog, placing a hand on its shoulder. "We're crossing, you understand?" The dog looked at the bridge, then at him, tail flicking once in what Colt decided to take as reluctant agreement. They moved quickly, staying low among the reeds. Every sound behind them felt amplified. The crunch of a boot, the slam of a truck door, the metallic rattle of a rifle. Colt's nerves screamed at him to move faster, but his legs were heavy, his right hand still bleeding from where the rope had bitten deep. When they reached the bridge, he saw how bad it truly was. The main support ropes were frayed, the boards slick with algae. The structure swayed slightly even in the calm wind. "We'll go one at a time," he whispered, though the dog stayed close at his heel, refusing to let him go first alone. They stepped onto the first board. It groaned under their weight, flexing but holding. The river roared below a cold, endless churn. Halfway across, the sound of an engine backfiring shattered the fragile rhythm. Colt froze, looking back. Through the trees, he saw movement. Two figures stepping out of the brush rifles, slung and faces smeared with soot. There, one shouted. By the water, Colt's heart dropped. The dog barked once sharp and defensive. The men raised their rifles. Colt ducked instinctively as bullets cracked through the air, splintering the wood around his feet. The bridge lurched under the vibration. The dog darted ahead, its paws slipping on the slick planks. Colt followed, running low, feeling the structure shift and groan beneath them. The poachers shouted, their voices swallowed by gunfire and wind. A bullet grazed the rope railing inches from Colt's hand, slicing one of the support cords. The bridge sagged dangerously. Colt reached the far side and turned, grabbing the remaining rope to pull the dog up the last stretch. "Come on!" he shouted. The dog leapt the final gap just as another round tore through the air, snapping the main cable. The bridge dropped half a foot with a violent jolt. Colt fell to one knee, clinging to the post, the dog skidding beside him. The whole structure tilted toward the water. Colt's instincts screamed to cut loose the bridge before it dragged them both in, but his mind raced ahead. If he dropped it now, the poachers could cross downstream. They needed a distraction, not an escape. His eyes darted to the severed rope lying across the ground near his boots, the last piece of his binding, the same rope that had held him prisoner. The irony hit him hard, but he grabbed it anyway. "All right," he whispered one more time. He tied one end around the splintered bridge post, looping the other around a low branch above the water. It wasn't perfect, but it would hold just long enough. He looked at the dog, who stood watching, head cocked, as if understanding his plan. "When this goes," Colt said quietly, "we run." The dog gave a low growl that sounded like agreement. Colt pulled hard on the rope, tightening the makeshift knot, then grabbed a loose board and wedged it beneath the post as leverage. Gunfire rang again, closer now. The poachers had reached the tree line. One of them shouted, "Don't let them cross!" Colt yanked the board free. The rope snapped loose from the tension, whipping across the bridge like a whip. The weakened support line gave way entirely, the far side collapsing into the river with a deafening crack. The structure buckled planks, snapping water exploding upward in white spray. The sudden collapse sent a shockwave across the span. The men on the other bank stumbled backward as debris flew into the air. Colt grabbed the dog's collar and dove just as the bridge tilted sideways. The world dropped out from beneath them. Cold water slammed into his body, driving the air from his lungs. The current seized them instantly, spinning them downstream amid shattered boards. Colt surfaced once, gasping the roar of the river, drowning out the shouts behind him. He reached for the dog, catching a flash of gray fur thrashing against the current. "Hold on," he shouted, but the water swallowed his voice. The rope he had tied whipped past, still attached to the broken beam, its end curling around his arm. It yanked him backward with brutal force. Panic flared. He tried to pull free, but the current twisted him under again. His vision blurred, lungs screaming for air. Then something heavy hit his shoulder, the dog clinging to the same debris teeth gripping the frayed rope. It pulled instinctively, and the force was enough to tear the strand loose from the beam. They shot forward together, tossed by the current, until finally the river widened and slowed. Colt's feet struck gravel. He coughed violently, dragging himself onto a shallow bank. The dog stumbled beside him, shaking water from its fur, shivering but alive. Colt lay there for a long moment, chest heaving, staring up at the canopy. Every muscle ached, every breath burned. Then he started laughing, a low, disbelieving sound that turned into a cough. "You're insane," he wheezed. "You really are." The dog barked weakly, tail giving one half-hearted wag. Colt rolled onto his side, looking back toward the river. Pieces of the bridge drifted downstream like ghosts. Smoke still hung faintly above the trees in the distance where the fire had been. He knew the poachers would find the wreckage eventually, but for now they had distance, and distance meant life. He reached out and touched the dog's shoulder, feeling the steady pulse beneath wet fur. "We made it," he whispered. Again. The dog nudged his hand, eyes half closed from exhaustion. Colt sat up, wringing out his sleeve. His dark skin scraped and raw, the remnants of the rope still wrapped around his wrist, like a mark of everything he'd survived. Night fell over the wilderness like a slow curtain of ash and silence. Colt Avery moved through the darkness with one arm pressed against his ribs. The pain from the river fall pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. His clothes clung heavy and damp, his boots squelching with every step. The dog limped ahead of him, keeping low, its gray fur streaked with mud, the faint gleam of its eyes catching every flash of moonlight through the trees. They had followed the riverbank for what felt like hours, too exhausted to speak, even if words could bridge the strange quiet between them. Behind them, far off, came the faint echo of engines, again, distant but persistent, like a threat refusing to die. The poachers were still hunting. Colt scanned the ridge ahead and spotted something barely visible through the mist. A silhouette of a small cabin half collapsed, leaning against a grove of dead firs. He recognized the structure instantly, an old ranger outpost, one of the first built before the service switched to the new towers. It was a ruin, but it meant shelter. There he rasped. The dog looked back, its tail flicking once before trotting toward the building. The door hung open, creaking with the wind. Inside, the air smelled of rot, rust, and time. A broken lantern lay on the floor next to a pile of discarded gear. Colt slumped against the wall, sliding down until he hit the cold wood. His muscles screamed in protest. The dog circled twice before settling beside him, its breathing shallow but steady. For a moment, peace existed between them, a fragile, precious pause in the chaos. "We did it," Colt whispered, though his voice carried more exhaustion than triumph. "We made it this far." The dog raised its head, sniffing the air, then let out a low, uneasy growl. Colt frowned. "What is it now?" Then he heard it, the crunch of tires on gravel closer than before. His pulse spiked. He crawled toward the window, peering through a cracked pane. 2 trucks had stopped at the edge of the clearing below. Flashlights danced through the trees, cutting through the dark like blades. "They're here," he muttered. The dog rose, hackles raised, muscles coiled tight. Colt's mind raced. They couldn't run. They were cornered between the cabin and the river. Hiding wouldn't work either. The dog's scent would give them away. His eyes darted across the room, landing on a half-buried toolbox in the corner. He crawled over, pried it open, and found what he needed: a rusted hatchet, dull but solid, and an old flare gun with one shot left. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make a stand. He looked at the dog. "We're not running anymore," he said quietly. "We finish it here." The dog didn't move, just stared back at him with that same fierce loyalty that had carried them through every fight so far. Outside, voices grew louder. "Spread out," one man yelled. "He's here somewhere. The bridge is gone." He couldn't have crossed far. Colt crouched near the window, gripping the hatchet, every nerve alive with tension. The first flashlight beam swept across the front door. The hinges creaked as a hand pushed it open. A man stepped inside, rifle raised, his boots crunching on glass. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his face hidden behind a scarf. He didn't see Colt immediately, but the dog did. With a low snarl, it lunged from the shadows, slamming into the man's chest. The rifle fired once, the shot tearing through the ceiling. The man went down hard, cursing. Colt surged forward, swinging the hatchet. The metal connected with the rifle's barrel, knocking it away. The man threw a punch, catching Colt in the jaw, but Colt didn't back down. He drove his shoulder into the man's chest, forcing him into the wall. The dog clamped onto the man's arm, teeth sinking deep. The man screamed, his gun hand twisting uselessly. "Get off me," he shouted, but the words turned to a howl of pain. Colt ripped the scarf from his face and saw recognition flicker in the man's eyes. It was the same one who had tied him to the tree. Rage surged through Colt, burning away the fear. "You remember me?" he said through clenched teeth. "This is where it ends." The man tried to grab his sidearm, but Colt's swing landed first. The hatchet struck with a dull thud. The man crumpled his body, sliding to the floor. The dog released its grip and stepped back, panting heavily. Colt stood there for a moment, chest heaving, staring down at the man who'd left him for dead. But there was no satisfaction, only emptiness. Outside, another voice shouted, "Gunfire!" Inside, Colt's head snapped up. He grabbed the flare gun and moved to the window, knowing the rest were coming. Two figures approached the cabin from the trees, flashlights bouncing wildly. Colt raised the flare gun, took a steadying breath, and fired. The flare shot through the window in a burst of red light, arcing across the clearing before exploding in the air. The poachers ducked, instinctively blinded. Colt didn't wait. He bolted out the back door, the dog right behind him. They sprinted around the cabin, keeping to the shadows. The flare lit the forest in crimson flashes, throwing their silhouettes across the trees. There, one man yelled. Gunfire followed, bullets slicing through bark and splintering wood. Colt dove behind a fallen log, dragging the dog with him. The gunfire paused, replaced by the crunch of approaching footsteps. He glanced around desperately. The flare had set a patch of dry brush alight near the trucks, the flames growing quickly. Smoke billowed upward. "Perfect," Colt muttered. He picked up a rock and hurled it into the opposite direction. The noise drew one of the men away, shouting to his partner. Colt waited until their footsteps separated, then moved. He crept low through the smoke, approaching the nearest man from behind. The dog followed, silently, limping but determined. When Colt was close enough to hear the man's breathing, he struck one sharp blow to the back of the knee, then a swing to the ribs. The man went down with a cry, his weapon clattering across the ground. Colt grabbed it instantly. The second poacher turned at the noise, firing blindly into the haze. Colt ducked and fired back once. The shot echoed through the clearing, then silence. For a long moment, only the crackle of fire filled the air. Colt stood chest heaving, the rifle trembling in his hands. The dog pressed against his leg, watching the flames consume the vehicles. "It's over," Colt whispered, lowering the gun. The dog barked once, a low, tired sound. Colt looked down at it, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah, you did it," he said softly. "You saved me again." The firelight flickered across the dog's fur, highlighting every scar, every mark of survival. In that light, Colt saw more than an animal. He saw a soul carved from the same grit and pain as his own. The first light of dawn broke through the smoke, turning the charred treetops into silhouettes painted against a bruised sky. Colt Avery walked slowly along the ridge, his body heavy from exhaustion and blood loss, his steps dragging through the wet grass that glistened under the new sun. The rifle he had taken from the poachers hung across his back, useless now that the fight was done. The forest was eerily quiet again, the echoes of gunfire swallowed by the rising wind. Behind him, the old ranger cabin was no more than a smoldering ruin, a grave for the men who had hunted him. The smell of smoke still clung to his clothes and skin. He didn't look back. There was nothing left there worth seeing. Beside him, the gray dog limped along head low, breath shallow. Its fur was crusted with dirt and blood, its steps uneven, but it didn't whine or slow. Colt had noticed the stiffness in its movement as soon as the fight ended, but now, under the light, he saw the truth. The blood that matted the fur beneath its ribs wasn't from the poachers, it was its own. The realization hit him like a blow. "No," he said, quietly, his voice raw from smoke. No, you're fine." The dog looked up at him with calm, steady eyes that said otherwise. Colt dropped to one knee, ignoring the pain in his own body, and reached out to check the wound. His hand came away red. The bullet must have grazed it during the chaos, cutting deeper than he'd thought. He pressed his palm against the wound, trying to slow the bleeding. "You should have stayed behind," he muttered, anger mixing with grief. "You didn't have to fight them all." The dog's tail gave one weak wag, the motion small but defiant. Colt's throat tightened. "You stubborn fool," he whispered. "You're just like me." He tore another strip from his shirt and wrapped it around the wound, his fingers shaking as he tied the knot. The dog stood still, eyes fixed on him, trusting, patient. When he was done, Colt sat back against a tree and looked out over the forest. The rising sun had burned away most of the smoke, leaving a wide view of valleys and ridges that stretched to the horizon. The fire they'd started had cleared half the trees on the far slope. From up here, the land looked scarred, but alive like them. The dog pressed against his leg, resting its head on his boot. Colt reached down, running a trembling hand through its fur. "You did good," he said softly. "You saved my life more times than I can count." The dog's breathing was shallow now, but its gaze never wavered. Colt wanted to move to find help, but there was nothing left nearby except wilderness. The nearest ranger station was miles away, and even if he could make it, the dog wouldn't survive the journey. He refused to accept that. "You're walking out of this," he said firmly, though his voice cracked. "We both are." He rose to his feet, sliding his arms beneath the animal's body. It was heavier than it looked, dense with muscle and life. The dog let out a quiet sound, half sigh, half protest, but didn't resist. Colt carried it carefully, one step at a time, his boots sinking into the damp earth. Each step sent knives of pain through his shoulders, but he didn't stop. The forest opened up ahead to a clearing. He recognized faintly a ranger memorial site built decades ago, a place where names of fallen wardens were carved into stone. It had always been a quiet refuge, a reminder of why he'd chosen this life. Now, it felt like the only place that made sense. The stone marker stood crooked and weathered moss creeping along its base. Colt laid the dog gently at its foot, brushing away fallen pine needles. "This is where we stop," he murmured. The dog blinked slowly, its breath uneven. Colt sat beside it, resting his back against the stone, the morning sun warming his face. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was heavy with everything they'd been through: the rope, the fire, the river, the fight. Every scar on their bodies was a shared language of survival. "You know," Colt said after a while, his voice low, "I never believed in second chances. Figured the world took what it wanted and left the rest to rot. But you," he paused, glancing down at the dog, "you changed that." The dog's eyes half closed, its breathing slowing. Colt's chest tightened. "Hey," he said softly, "stay with me." He reached out and rubbed the spot behind its ear, the same place it had liked from the first day they met by the trap. The dog's tail moved once more, weak but sure. Colt smiled faintly through the blur in his eyes. "That's it," he whispered. "You remember." The minutes stretched, time folding around them. Birds began to call in the distance, the forest waking again. Colt listened to it all, the rhythm of wind, the soft rustle of leaves, the pulse of life continuing even as one of its bravest faded beside him. The dog lifted its head one last time, meeting his gaze. There was no fear in its eyes, only calm, as if it understood what Colt couldn't bear to say. Then it lowered its head back onto his boot, exhaled softly, and went still. Colt sat frozen, unable to breathe. The world dimmed around him, every sound distant, muffled by the weight of loss. He reached out with shaking hands, touching the dog's neck, feeling for a heartbeat that wasn't there. "No," he whispered, voice breaking. "Come on, don't you quit on me now." But the stillness didn't change. The forest didn't answer. The wind carried only silence. For a long time, Colt stayed there, one hand resting on the dog's side, the other gripping the edge of the stone marker. His mind replayed everything the first time he'd seen it, trapped the scar on its shoulder, the way it had stood between him and the wolves, the way it had never hesitated when death came close. He realized then that what had driven it wasn't instinct or debt. It was something deeper: loyalty, choice, love in the only form it could give. As the sun rose higher, Colt finally stood his body, trembling from exhaustion and grief. He gathered rocks from around the clearing and built a small mound over where the dog lay, each stone placed with care. When it was done, he found an old ranger badge half buried in the dirt near the monument, tarnished and bent. He cleaned it with his thumb and set it on top of the mound. "You earned this," he said quietly. "More than most men I've ever known." He stood back, staring at the small grave as the wind stirred the grass around it. The forest was alive again, golden light spilling through the trees. Somewhere far off, the sound of a hawk cried out across the valley. Colt closed his eyes and let the sound wash over him. "You saved me," he said finally. By the time Colt Avery reached the ranger station, the sun was high and cruel, casting hard light over the smoldering ridges he had crossed through the night. His clothes were torn and stiff with dried blood, his boots worn through his throat, dry as ash. Each step echoed like a drumbeat of memory, each one carrying him further from the clearing where he had buried the gray dog. His mind still felt split open from the silence that followed its last breath. He hadn't spoken a word since sunrise. The old wooden station sat on the edge of the valley, like an aging sentinel, its flagpole bent from storms, its porch littered with leaves. Colt climbed the steps slowly, every muscle in his body screaming. Inside, the air smelled of dust and burnt coffee. A radio crackled faintly on the desk, broadcasting fragments of static and chatter. When the door shut behind him, the sound startled the man sitting at the desk. Officer Kincaid, a stocky ranger with a permanent scowl. Kincaid looked up sharply, his eyes widening as he took in Colt's battered state. "Jesus Avery," he said, standing. "They said you were dead." Colt set the rifle down on the counter, the weapon clattering like a confession. Almost was he rasped. "Poachers, 3 of them. They're not coming back." Kincaid frowned, studying him. "We heard the fire on the ridge. That was you." Colt hesitated, exhaustion and grief grinding his words to dust. "We started it to survive. Had no choice. They had me tied up, left me for wolves." Kincaid's expression darkened. "You know that fire spread 12 acres east before we got it under control. Half the reserve's old line is gone." Colt's chest tightened. "I didn't start it to burn the forest," he said, voice cracking. "I started it to stay alive." Kincaid folded his arms. "You expect me to write that up and have them believe it?" He nodded toward the rifle. "You show up covered in blood, armed, and tell me you killed 3 men. You realize what that looks like, right?" The words hit harder than Colt expected. He had imagined relief here, maybe a cup of coffee, a chance to breathe. Instead, suspicion hung in the air like smoke. He straightened slowly, forcing himself not to break. "Check the clearing," he said, jaw clenched. "There's rope fibers on the acacia near the west trail. My blood on them, their prints all over the ground. You'll find shell casings too. They hunted me. Kincaid didn't move, and this fire, Colt met his gaze, saved me. For a long moment, neither spoke. The radio crackled again, breaking the silence. Then Kincaid sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "You've been through hell," he muttered. "Sit down, I'll call it in." Colt sank into the chair, every bone heavy. Kincaid picked up the radio, his voice low as he spoke to dispatch. Colt barely heard him. His mind wandered back to the monument, the way the dog had looked at him one last time, before closing its eyes, the stillness that had followed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out what he had taken before leaving the small piece of metal he had found buried near the outpost, engraved with faded letters. It was an old ranger badge, but on the back, Colt had scratched one word with his knife: loyalty. He placed it on the desk gently. Kincaid ended the transmission and turned back. "They're sending a team to verify," he said. "You'll need to file a report." Colt nodded. "Yeah." Kincaid looked at the badge. "What's that?" Colt stared at it a moment before answering. "Proof that not all heroes wear uniforms." Kincaid frowned, confused, but said nothing. The phone rang in the back room and he went to answer it, leaving Colt alone. The room felt too quiet, too civilized, too far removed from the brutality of the woods. Colt leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at his reflection in the dusty window. The man looking back at him didn't seem like a ranger anymore, more like something the forest had carved out of stubborn will and grief. He reached down to his pack and pulled out the only other thing he'd kept, a small fragment of the rope that had once bound him. He turned it in his hands, the fibers stiff with dried blood, and then tossed it into the trash. "No more ropes," he whispered, echoing the words he had spoken by the river. Outside, the wind shifted. Through the window, he saw smoke still rising faintly from the distant ridge, curling into the pale sky. Kincaid returned, expression unreadable. "They confirmed your story," he said. "Bodies found. Ropes, casings, the whole mess. You're clear." Colt nodded but didn't feel relief. "And the fire?" Kincaid hesitated. "They're calling it contained. You did what you had to." He studied Colt for a moment, then added, "Whatever happened out there, you're lucky to be alive." Colt looked up slowly. Luck had nothing to do with it. Kincaid tilted his head. Then what did? Colt's voice was steady now, quiet but certain. "Loyalty." Kincaid said nothing, just nodded once and stepped away, giving him space. Colt sat there for a long time after that, the hum of the radio filling the silence. When he finally stood, the stiffness in his body felt permanent, like scars made of muscle and memory. He picked up the badge, slipping it back into his pocket, and walked out into the sunlight. The air outside smelled of pine and smoke, and somewhere in the distance, the faint sound of birds returned to the sky. He stood on the porch, looking toward the hills. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of solitude without fear. The forest that had nearly killed him now felt like something sacred, a living witness to what loyalty could mean. He descended the steps slowly, boots crunching over gravel, and walked toward the ranger jeep parked nearby. He stopped halfway, turning once more toward the horizon. In his mind, he saw the gray dog standing in the dawn light at the monument tail, flicking one's eyes calm and knowing. The image felt so real that his chest ached. "You kept your promise," he murmured. "Guess it's my turn." He climbed into the jeep and started the engine. The rumble echoed through the quiet valley, mingling with the rustle of the wind. Summer came early that year, melting the last traces of snow from the upper ridges and painting the valley green again. The forest that had once been burned and scarred by fire now breathed with new life, the air filled with the scent of pine and renewal. Colt Avery drove the same narrow road that wound through the foothills, his ranger jeep bouncing gently over roots and stones, sunlight flickering through the trees. It had been months since the night of the fire, months since he buried the gray dog beneath the old ranger monument, and yet not a single day passed when he didn't think about that morning, the weight of the animal's head on his boot, the silence that followed, and the strange peace that came after grief. Time had dulled the pain, but never erased it. He still wore the ranger badge in his jacket pocket, the one he had found at the monument, the one he had marked with a single word: loyalty. The new assignment had come quietly, an investigation into the regeneration of the burned zone, part of his duty to assess wildlife return, but deep down he knew it was more than work. It was a pilgrimage, a return to the place that had changed him forever. He parked at the base of the ridge and stepped out, boots sinking into soft moss. The forest was alive again. Birds sang in the high branches. A deer lifted its head from a meadow of new grass and watched him pass without fear. Colt walked the same path he'd stumbled through half-dead months before, only now it was bright with sunlight and silence that felt forgiving rather than cruel. The scars on his wrists had faded to pale lines, but they still tingled as he touched them, reminders of what had bound him and what had freed him. He reached the clearing by midday. The monument still stood weathered, but steady, the stones he had stacked over the dog's resting place now covered in wildflowers. Someone or something had disturbed the mound's small prints in the dirt, suggesting visitors. Colt knelt, brushing away the leaves. "Hey there, partner," he said softly. "The forest looks better than when we left it." The breeze answered with the faint rustle of leaves. He placed his hand on the stones and closed his eyes. In that quiet moment, memories flooded back: the fire's roar, the river's pull, the wolves' eyes in the dark. He remembered the poacher's shouts and the deafening silence that followed their fall. But most of all, he remembered the dog's gaze, calm, steady, full of trust that had never been broken. "You kept me alive when I didn't deserve it," he murmured. "You gave me back something I'd lost before I even knew it was gone." He opened his eyes at the sound of a twig snapping behind him. Instinct made him turn sharply, hand drifting to the knife on his belt. But what stepped from the trees wasn't a threat. It was small, cautious, and impossibly familiar. A pup no older than a few months, its fur a soft mix of gray and black. Its amber eyes bright with curiosity. Colt froze, his throat tightening. The pup sniffed the air, tilting its head as it studied him, then took a tentative step forward. A thin white scar crossed its shoulder in the exact place where the gray dogs had been. Colt's heart stumbled. "You've got to be kidding me," he whispered, disbelief giving way to wonder. The pup took another step closer, tail flicking once before wagging hesitantly. Its paws stopped near the edge of the stones, nose brushing the air above them as if recognizing the scent buried there. Colt's breath caught. He crouched slowly, lowering himself to the pup's level. "You know who's under there, don't you?" he said softly. The pup looked at him, eyes wide, then sat down in the grass as though it had been waiting for him all along. Colt extended his hand carefully. The pup hesitated for a heartbeat, then pressed its nose against his palm. That single touch unraveled something deep inside him, a knot of guilt, loss, and gratitude all at once. He let out a shaky laugh, blinking against the sting in his eyes. "Well," he said, "guess you found me the same way your old man did." The pup leaned closer, licking his fingers once, tentative but trusting. Colt smiled, a real one this time, unguarded and warm. "All right then," he said quietly. "Let's start over." He looked toward the monument again, sunlight glinting off the old badge that still rested at the top of the mound. He took it in his hand, the word loyalty catching the light. He held it up for a moment, then clipped it to his vest pocket. "He'd want me to keep it," he said, glancing at the pup. "And maybe you'll grow into it one day." The pup barked once, high-pitched and eager, before bounding in a small circle around him. Colt laughed quietly, the sound blending with the whisper of wind through the trees. For the first time since that long, dark night, the forest felt like home again. He spent the rest of the afternoon restoring the stones, clearing the fallen branches, and gathering new ones to mark the grave properly. The pup stayed near him, watching every move, occasionally pawing at the dirt as if trying to help. When the work was done, Colt sat down beneath the shade of the monument, the pup curling up beside him. "This is where it all started," he said softly, looking out over the valley. A rope, a fire, a fight, and a friend who refused to let go. The pup tilted its head, listening. Colt smiled faintly. "You'll learn what that means someday. The forest will teach you. It teaches all of us." He reached down, scratching behind its ear the same gesture he had given the gray dog so many times. The pup leaned into the touch, eyes closing in contentment. Colt looked up at the sky, watching a hawk drift in slow circles high above the trees. The wind carried the scent of pine and the distant murmur of the river. Everything felt connected: the pain, the loss, the renewal. The lesson was as clear as the sky itself. Kindness given once could echo, forever carried forward by those who remembered. As the shadows lengthened, Colt rose to his feet, the pup following close. He took one last look at the monument, the badge glinting faintly in the sun, and whispered, "Thank you, old friend. You did good." The breeze picked up, rustling through the wildflowers as if in answer. Colt smiled, turning towards the trail. The pup trotted beside him, small but proud, its steps quick and light. "Come on, kid," he said softly. "Let's see what kind of ranger you'll make." Together they walked into the trees, the sunlight stretching long across the forest floor, golden and endless. The river sang somewhere far below, carrying away the ashes of the past and leaving only what was meant to endure. Colt didn't look back this time. The end. If this story moved, you make sure to like the video and subscribe. It helps bring more true tales of courage and loyalty to life. Tell me in the comments what part of Colt and the dog's journey hit you the hardest, and where in the world you're watching from. I read every single one.